Hi, everyone. Welcome to the first episode of Junket. I'm Evan Schwartz. I wanted to start a podcast that gave me the excuse to talk to cool people and basically just whoever I want. And so I've done that. The idea is that I want to interview all kinds of filmmakers about specific films from their careers that interest me, and hopefully we'll have some cool conversations. And today I have a very cool conversation. I have special guest Lynn Hershman Leeson, who directed Teknolust. Teknolust is a film that, first and foremost, stars four clones of Tilda Swinton. But it's also a joyful and hopeful and loving exploration of technology's relationship to humanity. Feel free to listen to this interview before checking out the film if you haven't seen it. It's kind of a hard film to spoil. I think it'll provide some good context for you. And if you have seen it, I think you'll learn a thing or two. She says some stuff in here that I definitely didn't know about. It's a short and sweet interview. Really enjoyed speaking with her. And anyway, so I hope you enjoy my talk with Lynn Hershman Leeson. All right, so the first thing I'm really curious about with Teknolust is how does a project like this come to be in terms of the pitch, the funding, and the development? I'm very curious, especially with your background in visual arts. How do you get a film like this off the ground? I know you had done Conceiving Ada first, but how did Teknolust come to be?
Well, I made a film, a video with borrowed equipment, and it was called Long Shot, and I sent it off to France, and it won a prize in a festival, and I think first prize, and it was like my second video, and there was somebody there from ZDF television, and so they commissioned me to do three films, and Conceiving Ada was the first, and Technolust was the second. So that's how it happened. I mean, it's very simple. I didn't have to go out and raise money for it. Uh, so
Really? So was it the kind of thing where you could just say, I'm doing this, and they gave you free reign?
they were they gave me a lot of free reign. They liked Conceiving Ada a lot, and I think they trusted me. And then because Tilda was in it, uh, I had a lot of leeway to make it crazy. So, so yeah, I mean, it
How did,
wasn't like there were investors that were breathing down my neck and wanting it to be commercial and all of that.
yeah, I mean, do you feel like that's kind of coming from a different film industry? I feel like, 20 something years have passed and it feels like the industry is really different now in terms of how films are financed and made.
Yeah, I think now, it seems like everything is streaming and you don't have independent investors. I think the day of the indie is over. I think that was the time, but that one could break through as an independent, and I don't think that's possible now. I think it's a whole different system.
Yeah, and I get how did Tilda get involved? Because she wasn't the big Hollywood star she is now.
No, I mean, I had seen Orlando, and I thought, well, she's one of the few people I thought could do it, and it was just everything is accidental, and people were saying, oh, she'll never do it, and don't have a big budget. But I was showing a film at the Berlin Film Festival, and I happened to sit right next to someone, and they asked me what I was doing, and I told them, I said I wanted Tilda to do it, and they said she was their best friend, so she called Tilda, and Tilda called me. And then when her agent found what my budget was, he said we could only have her, for a short time. So Conceiving Ada we shot in 5 days.
No, it
Technolust, I think,
was?
yeah,
I don't believe that. I don't believe that.
yeah, it's true. Technolust
Wow.
wasn't much longer, maybe 8 or 10 days, not much longer than that.
You're saying Technolust was made in 10 or less days.
Yeah.
That's really hard to believe because there's so many. I mean, especially were there challenges with doing 4 Tilda Swintons? I mean, how do you do that in such a short period of time?
It was actually easier, because you didn't have multiple actors, and because it was Tilda, so she was great. I think I would have had more trouble if I had different actors, different kinds of actors, and it was the first time I used a sound stage, so things were developed there, and it was not a lot of running around with the crew.
Did you have like an extensive pre-production process? Because it's such a, I mean, the sets and the car she drives and everything is just, it feels so intentional and all so planned out and beautifully executed. And like, what was the pre-production like?
It was fairly simple. I had a really good production designer, and like with the car, I saw it on the street and we tracked one down. That's how that happened. But everything was serendipitous, like meeting Tilda, so it was we just ran with it. And of course, other funding fell through. I thought I was gonna get some investors, and the night before, they my attorney said was going to invest, and he said nobody had invested and he quit. And so we were left, with nothing except for what I got from German television. And so I just kept cutting scenes, and we did it, it wasn't a leisurely shoot, but somehow, I was really committed to doing it. I had a contract with Tilda that I had to pay her whether or not we made the film. So we were going to make the film.
So what kind of director are you? Like, what the performances are so expressive and so heightened, and I'm curious, like, kind of what kinds of directions would you give on set to kind of get those amazing performances?
I think that I talk to actors and listen to them. I also do a lot of improv and collaboration. Often the actors are pretty intelligent and they have better ideas, and I let them go with it. So I think because they weren't used to it, and and the nature of improvisation, we were able to go further. And that's kind of the way the whole thing was, most of it was, improv as to how to shoot it and what they were going to say, even though we had a script, but we veered a lot from that script.
Really? So would you say there was like a lot of improv like that made it into the cut?
Almost all of them. I mean, in
Oh,
one case, I put the camera over Tilda and I guess Jeremy Davies, and even the cameraman left. So they were just in bed talking for an hour. We used a lot of it.
your work focuses on the relationship between technology and humanity, and I'm curious from your perspective, making this movie, did you feel hopeful or scared about technology at the time? This was such a different time, and I'm curious, like, kind of what your perspective was when making this film.
Well, I've never been afraid of technology. I'm always hopeful because ultimately, it's people who are behind the technology and people who are able to pull the plug also, if it gets out of hand. So, I mean, I would say more curious and fascinated with the possibilities of technology. Um, and one other thing that's important is you have to keep your sense of humor. You can't take any of this too seriously because that kind of pushes it downward. So there was a lot of spirit in making the film.
The film is so joyful and it does feel so hopeful and beautiful, and yeah, I love the band-aid. I love I love all the little touches. They're just so playful. And
Oh,
what
they
what
were they were kind of plays on other movies, like uh there were other movies where the lead was wearing a Band-Aid, but I just moved the Band-Aid all over. But most of those things were based on other things that had happened cinematically. So there's kind of like an in-joke.
This was one of the first productions fully digital, or what's the story behind that?
Yeah, it was 24, it was high definition 24 frame video. Um, George Lucas claimed that he did it first, but I did mine maybe 3 weeks earlier. That's what the lab told me. They said mine looked better, but but it was one of the first anyway to do that.
So how did you come upon that technology at the time? Did your DP suggest it? Was it your idea?
Well, I think I somebody told me about it. The engineer I was working with, the sound engineer, told me about it. So, we were able to get it through him and work with that.
Yeah, I mean, it feels like it couldn't have been shot on film.
And it would
It's
have taken so long on film, and editing would have been so expensive. So,
when working in other visual mediums, I guess what's the difference between the headspace you get into when making a film and when doing basically anything else that you do?
film is the hardest, and it's also the most intense. I say, if you're doing art, you could do other things. You could take a walk, you could do all kinds of other things, or I can anyway, no matter how intense the art making is. But with film, it's absolutely, you can't do anything else but the film. It's like completely engrossing, and takes up all of your effort and energy. And I find it's really, as glorious as it is, and how as rewarding as it is, as fun as it is, I you can't. It just takes every ounce of your spirit and and thought to get it done. Especially these low budget films. I don't know what it's like to work with a real budget, but I expect it's not as stressful.
Yeah, I mean, do you have any ways of keeping yourself sane while working on a film? Because it is such a long and exhausting process.
No, at the time I was making it, I think making the film made me sane. Not making it would have been a problem.
So, what else do you have going on right now? What are you working on?
Well, in my art, yeah, I did doing a project called the Infinity Engine, which is about genetic engineering. And the last thing I did for it was the conversion of my research into DNA itself, as well as an antibody named after me. But the new project that I'm doing, which is also part of this whole effort, is a piece about anti-aging, and I just was able to get an anti-aging powder from China made, and that'll be an installation with a bunch of mirrors. Because I looked up all the scientists I had been working with on the Infinity Engine, which were leading scientists, maybe 20. They were all working with immortality and age resistance, because after they developed CRISPR, they're able to regenerate cells. So that's the next step. And as far as film, I started a project in the mid 1990s. The first was called Seduction of a Cyborg, and the second was called Shadow Stalker, which was 2017. In Venice, I did a piece called Logic Paralyzes the Heart. And then the fourth part of that whole series um, is called Immortality, and it's written and performed by a ChatGPT character who wrote the script. But I worked with one of the first chat programs in 1996. It was an extension of Teknolust, and it was called agentruby.net, and you could chat with the character. So I've been doing it for a while.
It's really interesting kind of seeing you stay very consistent in your thesis throughout your career. But how do you feel the mindset has changed as things have advanced, or how do you feel about where you're coming from with your work as the years go by?
Well, I think, it's too bad that it took 23 years for people to realize how overlooked my work was. I think if people had given it a chance when I made it, uh, that I probably would have been able to make a lot more uh, films and feature films. But being female in those days, and doing these weird projects that didn't make any money, is really difficult. But I'm doing things anyway.
Yeah, well, I always see Teknolust pop up on social media, and people still talk about it. It's quite a popular film, I would say.
Well, now it is, and it's been the test of time, and it's on Criterion. It was on last year. Now they rebought it and they're re-releasing it. So that's all good. I think with all of my work, I do it and then it gets discovered 30 years later. So this is not just this film, it's most of what I do.
Ahead of its time.
Well, it's in its time. It's just that nobody else is.
What was the distribution like for Teknolust? Because I actually am completely unaware of what did it play in theaters? What was the
I paid for it to open in New York and San Francisco. I booked the theater and put it in and hired a publicist, but there were supposed to be it played at Sundance and people booed and walked out of the theater. It played in Berlin and there was the same thing happened. And so people who were going to distribute it didn't want to do it, even though we had a contract that they were supposed to. They just didn't do it. So in order to get a scene at all, I had to take charge of that. So it didn't get really a distributor till about 2 years ago.
So yeah, that is the first episode of Junket. I have some really exciting guests lined up, so definitely follow @JunketPod on Twitter or @evian.official on Instagram if you want to stay up to date with everything that's about to come, because it's going to be a lot of fun. Anyway, thank you for listening, and I will see you on the next episode.